the statement that was going to close the last segment, can you open with that statement now?
God providentially used Dr. Daniel Fuller to, the way I put it, was to save my education. I mean, I was coming to a place, finally, where I loved education, I loved the whole, and now I'm coming to the end and I'm realizing it's everywhere. Nothing's connecting. My philosophy classes are not connecting with theology classes. Theology classes or systematic theology classes are not connecting with biblical theology classes. Nothing's connecting with Bible classes. You know, and none of these things, and those kind of theological stuff is certainly not connecting with pastoral church ministry classes. Everything was just,
scattered,
and disconnected. And so that's my statement. Long story short is that these pieces that were so scattered, Daniel Fuller was the initial main flesh person in front of me, causing those things that were so disconnected to become connected, to see more of a theological whole, or as his course that he had taught for many years, called Unity
of the Bible,
was coming together for me. Now, in the numbers of things that were huge for me, it's 1993, so I'm 12 years into being a Christian. I had never, ever, in any serious way, thought it was something I needed to deal with. This question here. The sovereignty of God. I mean, everyone uses the term, but I mean, no, let's really define what we mean. Is God really, actually in control of everything? Or not? Under Dan Fuller, because classes were one thing, but because his classes were so rich, my schedule was always meant, I'm just not going anywhere after class. If he's going to hang around 2 hours, I'm going to hang around 2 hours. And for the first time it's hitting me, I cannot get around this big question now. The question and the biblical text had so grabbed me that, Joe, you can't do what so many of you Christians want to do. Just avoid it. I could. I did it for 12 years. I couldn't do it anymore. And part of it was frightening to me, because I realized I was literally contemplating God is utterly different in that he is in absolute control of every flap of an insignificant, in our mind, wing of a fly. And that my salvation, or anyone's salvation, is owing totally to God. Not 99.999%. But that if he is sovereign this way, that must mean, this is just a philosophical thought here, and a logical thought, that it must mean, if I'm saved, it's because he chose me. Now, when you put the type of philosophical and logical grid that was, to me, seeming the only way you can be able to filter through life through here, and you kept putting that now also through biblical statements in their context in text, the coming to a conclusion on this issue was becoming unavoidable. And it frightened me to one extent, and it excited me to another. That's what I'm going through right at the brink of my wedding day, too. And my fiance is getting a little nervous because of our conversation.
Is he even a Christian?
Well, she did tell me, you really need to be careful of this Dr. Fuller guy.
Wow.
She actually made that statement. And so, other connections at this time. So I'm in this 1993. At the end of that spring of 93 quarter, I'm going to be married in July. Every year, Dr. Fuller would have, for years, the meeting of the Ark. Former students would come to California, and it'd be like a week long, and they would arc passages and discuss, and then they would do theological. Someone would be responsible to write a theological paper, and they would debate it, and et cetera, et cetera. And if you know Dr. Fuller, he is what he wants to call himself, a Socratic teacher. He hates to lecture. He wants to argue. Oh yeah, yeah. Just a little ditty for quick. You know, I remember you show up to Unity of the Bible, which was a syllabus all those years, until I took it. It just, the year before, was finally published in book form. And so he'll start class, well, did you read the chapter? I don't have anything else to say, so you got any questions?
I already wrote the book.
And so Dan Fuller was his best in debate, in Q&A, and he loved to ask you questions. And I loved that style of learning under him like that. So the Meeting Arc is going to happen, and this year, what was going to happen at the Meeting Arc that Dr. Fuller, I was watching because I'm having him for 2 classes, that he's trying to get together Dr. Mao, who's a professor at Fuller, and I had him for ethics, and he was going to become the next president of Fuller Theological Seminary. He wrote in one of his chapters on, I think it's called, the book is called The God Who Commands, on hedonism, and he quoted and essentially put down John Piper, who wrote a book called Christian Hedonism. Now, when you read later on...
The book was called Christian Hedonism?
John Piper's... No, it's called Desiring God, Meditations of a Christian Hedonist. Thank you very much. And a book that I had never read at this point.
It's a fairly recent book back then.
Well, yeah. Well, you know, 5 years.
5 years old.
6 years. So Dr. Mao wrote some things, and just which when you ever have read Desiring God, you realize Dr. Mao never read Desiring God.
Okay.
Meditation of Christian Hedonists. He might have read a blurb or two, and it was like, it's not the book you're talking about. So what are you doing in this published book? So Dr. Fuller wanted to get a debate going when John Piper would be in town for the Meeting of the Ark with Dr. Mao, and we didn't know how big it would be or how small, whether they would use a room at the seminary or Dr. Fuller's living room. Well, it ended up being at Dr. Fuller's living room. Maybe there was 25, 30 people were jammed in there, and Dr. Mao, that very night at midnight, would become the next president after Alan Hubbard of Fuller Theological Seminary. And John Piper wrote a paper responding to Dr. Mao in that chapter beforehand so that we can all get it who wanted to be involved in this debate and read it, and it was a good paper. And Dr. Mao read it, and so Dr. Mao apologized. And we had the debate in there. And anyway, that was essentially my first introduction of John Piper. Was there that day. It was on a few weeks later, on my honeymoon. What a great honeymoon, man. A wonderful wife, and reading the book called Desiring God, Meditations of a Christian Hedonist by John Piper. I can still see it out there on the balcony and the trees and Lake Tahoe. And honey, you gotta here, sit down, listen to this.
Poor son,
And then that fall I took Dan Fuller for Unity of the Bible, which was so utterly separate, where all this paradigm is still going on as he's introducing me to Jonathan Edwards, and especially this issue of the will, divine election. I was still struggling through all that, through these months and months and months and months, and I would say even the next couple of years after that. But introducing me to Edwards' treatise on the will, and talking about it, and I was stunned at answers that Dr. Fuller would give me. I mean, I never heard such things before. So that's all going on in 1993. The other thing, Dr. Fuller kept talking about, John Piper, he's one of the best preachers that Fuller Seminary ever produced. You have any tapes? Can I hear him preach? This is before you guys, this whole crazy internet age and everything. This was just different back then.
I was going to say, maybe there's someone out there who the tapes are like a little rectangular thingy with like 2 holes in the middle. There's a machine ready to, like sounds come out of that. You put it in a hole there and sounds come out of it. Tapes back then. So now Joe is going to get some tapes from Dan Fuller with John Piper preaching.